Everybody, welcome back with the Purplatypus is the name, and welcome to another Path of Exile 2 video. I am what some people would call a game tourist, which I actually, I was watching a DS Lily video, and there was that little drama or whatever, and I just want to say I actually really like that terminology. I think it perfectly describes exactly what it is. Someone that tours, goes around, visits, but you don't live there. And I don't think it's derogatory at all. But anyway, that's a side note. I wanted to talk about things that I think Path of Exile 2 should improve, or I would like to see them improve on. And so I'm gonna complain. A guy that barely plays Path of Exile 2 complains about the game. No, I've pretty much only done positive content on the game. So this is the first, and I wouldn't even call it negative. I would just say these are things I would like them to improve. And nothing here is, in my opinion, nothing here is going to be related to like content or balancing, or even like the economy. Nothing that I think that they're probably going to work on and improve. I was like, I think they should have more classes in the games. Like, yeah, no shit. That's why they're adding more classes. These are going to be things that I think are very likely to never change, unless they make a conscious effort and people talk about it. So that is what we are talking about today. And again, you are going to see a bias of a new player here. These are things that are probably not going to really be important to experienced players, but I think all perspectives are important, especially if you're trying to draw on a bunch of new people. So we'll kind of just go, and I have like 5 things here. We'll just kind of go in a random order here. So the very first one is this armor and evasion percents. I found this to be a little, not misleading, but it just, the information, yeah, I guess misleading is the word, right? So you get an armor and you get a percent. And if you don't look at anything, you just kind of glance at it. Like if you looked at 50% or whatever, you'd be like, okay, that's 50% physical damage reduction. You wouldn't look into it any more than that, right? Because this is 75% fire reduction, 75, whatever. This is just a flat amount of reduction. When you look at this, you see 75% chance to evade, 75% armor. You just assume that's a flat reduction. That's not how it works. And when you look at it, it just says estimated physical damage reduction. So what this says to me is like, okay, there's a range. And so I'm thinking it has, maybe it's like taking into account armor piercing. Maybe some attacks have an armor piercing mechanic. So it's not always 81%. It's estimated to be 81%. But I find this to be relatively misleading because it's like these systems work totally different. And like, so if it wasn't for the crypt video, I would never know that there is a armor index, basically, where it's like the amount of armor you have versus how much damage the hit is and how much reduction you have. Like the bigger the hit, the less your armor affects that hit, right? And so I think that that is not a bad system necessarily, but I really think that kind of thing should be explained in some way, somehow. Like when you go over to like fire and it has this like little burb here, if you go over to armor, it should have like this dark text as well that says armor is less effective against larger hits, or more effective against smaller hits, like a 99% reduction at, estimated, at taking 10 damage, and then like 5% reduction at taking 10,000 damage. I don't know. Just something that better articulates this. I found it really confusing because here's the thing. I genuinely had no idea how armor worked, and I had been building a lot of armor. Sometimes it felt like it did a lot. Other times it felt like it did nothing, and I couldn't really put my finger on why. And so I had to go outside the game to resources of other people to figure out what this is. So I think, and it's basically the same for evasion as a different method, but basically there's like, you're always guaranteed to get hit at a point. It's basically like you have like this high evasion chance, and when you get into a fight, they roll like a number, and then every time they try to hit you, they'll add to that number, and eventually you'll hit a threshold where you're gonna get hit on the next time. Something like that. I still don't even fully understand it, to be honest, but I watched that defenses video on YouTube that got pretty popular. So I would like them to just have more clear information here about what these do. That way players know if they even want to invest the resources. Because now here I am with 20,000 armor, right? Like, what am I going to do? Redo my whole build to have no armor and just go like energy shield? Like, I just don't have... maybe I could do that, but it's just like, I'm not experienced. So the amount of work I have to put in to make that a complete change, I think would be... it's just not really viable. And so maybe I would have played the game differently had I realized armor worked the way it did, and having more max HP was just been better. But in my mind, that was good. The next one that I think the game really should do a better job at doing is explaining what the heck these endgame systems do. I feel like they just knew that a lot of Path of Exile 1 people would be playing this, and they were like, we don't need to really explain it. It's kind of self-evident. And the thing is, they're not, even though in a sense they can be, but they all have nuances to them, which I didn't know. The one that really I don't feel like needs explanation is Ritual, basically. That is, you hit a button and you fight things. Then after you kill those things, you get to spend the currency in the ritual. That one is pretty self-explanatory. But even for things like Breach, Breach has a mechanic where, yes, you hit a button and it starts expanding now, and you kill monsters and it, retracts. But I didn't know, apparently, if you kill more monsters, it'll extend the duration of the breach. Now, obviously, you're trying to kill as much monsters as possible anyway, so that's one thing. But I just didn't know it worked that way. So I wasn't putting map modifiers to increase mob density on those, because it just didn't really, I didn't understand it worked that way. I could tell that the breaches sometimes lasted a long time and sometimes didn't last a long time. I thought maybe it was me grabbing hands. Maybe it was based on the size of the map I was in. I didn't know. So I was just kind of going in blind, not doing anything. Delirium has this a little bit as well. Not as bad, but mostly because Delirium was bugged. So sometimes I would spawn and there would be no mist. Sometimes I would spawn and there'd be a bunch of enemies. But I didn't know if I should clear out a map and then do it and then go around, or if I should do the thing first. And if, like, it just didn't really explain the endgame mechanics, especially actually the one I want to talk about the most, which was the most confusing, even though it could seem straightforward, was Expedition. Like, there's all these symbols on the map. I thought the remnants was the only thing that mattered. I didn't realize these flags sticking out of the ground weren't just visual. I didn't understand that that's where monsters come from, basically. So I had to go online to learn all this stuff. So I would like them to better actually just tutorialize and teach what these actual mechanics are. And even, I don't know, just have, there's like a, instead maybe next to a social screen or an options or something, have a tutorial screen. Just remind me, this is the base functionality. Here are some light recommendations for how to extract more resources out of these endgame activities, stuff like that. I think it would have been really helpful where I didn't have to, because I probably spent dozens of hours doing them inefficiently because I just had no idea. All right, and this is the last one that I think is kind of like specifically just like gonna affect new players much more than other players. But it's something that happened to me a lot, and it was very frustrating. Not a lot, but it happened. When it happened, it was very frustrating because I did make the mistake multiple times. So I would have an item like, I don't know, maybe it's not this one, for example, but I would have an item like, I don't know, let's just say it was this. And it would be like this, right? It would be an item that I had equipped. I was level 38, but I had an item level of like 77, just like this. And so I would be using this for a while. And then at some point, I finally had some exalted orbs, and I was trying to improve my gear that I have. And I would throw an exalted orb, and this could go from level 38 to, in this case, it didn't. But then it would just jump up to like level 56 or something. Like it would, the item level would, the level required to equip would drastically go up. So I had this exact situation, and I just didn't know that would happen. There was no like warning, no preview. It's because I was trading for stuff, right? And I'm sure the item level is way higher than like what the base level was or something. And when you put the exalt on it, I don't know, it like re-rolled the required level. But like I had an amulet like this, right? It was something to like, it was like 20 all stats, which was great. It was good for me. But so it was missing a modifier. So I put an exalted orb on it, and it fell off, basically. It's like, oh, you can't use it. You need to be 20 levels higher now. So I got no stats from that. So I had to take that off when I did lose melee skills on it when I had it. But then when I lost that, I could no longer equip my helmet because I didn't have the stats to equip my helmet anymore. So my helmet didn't work. And then when I couldn't equip my helmet, it also made my boots not work because I didn't have like the strength on my helmet to give me the strength on this, to give me the strength. So it's like suddenly by just using one exalted in an attempt to make my gear stronger, I had to have this, I had to spend like 20 minutes, trading, trying to work on gear just to make it so I could actually make it so my shit worked. And that was very frustrating because I just would have not used the exalted had I known. But there was nothing that implied to me that it would have that effect. And that was just like a point of frustration. Again, like these are all minor nitpicks in a sense. But if something is going to drastically change your item level where you won't be able to equip it after you do it, maybe give me a pop-up. Maybe say like, oh, a preview of like, oh, this item level will go up to or this level requirement will go up. Just something, I think that would be very, very helpful to new players. And honestly, old players alike, because I'm sure at some point you might just throw an Exalt and forget, and then it falls off, and then half your build doesn't work. You got to replace all your gear until you're a high enough level to put it all back on. But yeah. All right, one that I actually want to, this one is important, but I don't know exactly how they fix it. But it's basically misleading tooltip damage. I don't know how they're calculating it exactly. It's like, this is like in a perfect scenario. But this has been pretty inaccurate on almost anything that I've ever used, any build I've ever used for different reasons. Like on shock, right? When you're doing all the little things, like, is it accounting for how many of those things hitting? Is it accounting for them all hitting, for one of them hitting, for one of them hitting? Because sometimes one of them can hit twice. So it's really hard to get an accurate DPS on those kinds of abilities. But I was thinking Shockwave Totem. This is simple. It comes out, you do it, and it does an explosion. How could it be wrong with the DPS here, right? Like, it's so simple. So what I was doing is I was increasing the DPS a lot on paper by getting things like blurred motion, right? You get 5% increased attack speed or whatever, things like this, right? You know, just increase attack speed. If you look here, it looks like it increases my damage by 3,000 right here, or even this, like this one passive note here, right? Getting 2,000, you know, 1,100 more damage. So you're like, oh, this is great. But really what happens when you get this is it increases the attack speed. And so it was really heavily saying like, hey, attack speed makes your damage go way up. But on the totems, the way it works is if I get like 15% more attack speed, they still only attack 3 times. So I still only get the same amount of damage per totem. Now, maybe in a perfect scenario where I'm casting like 4 totems and then like they attack a little bit faster, and then I notice that it's done attacking and it's not going to get a final one, and so I interrupt it and summon a new one while it's still up, knowing it's not going to have enough time to get another attack, then maybe you could get a little bit of damage out, but it's effectively a 0% damage increase over the course of a, you know, small to medium amount of time. And even then, even so, like until you get that extra hit off of the totem, it didn't really feel like it was much of a damage increase at all. Although I'm sure it's calculating how fast I get these attacks out as well. So I get these out a little bit faster and then they attack a little bit faster. Yes, it's true that like you get more damage, I guess, but not like this huge percent increase that it is feeling like it's saying that I'm getting. So like this is not me saying that they need to fix these tooltips, like whatever. It's kind of a nice baseline, but what I think they should do is add some sort of dummy or something. Any kind of just, they don't even need to have resistances on it. They could just have a dummy right here, or, you know, something you could put into your camp. I don't care what its resistances are. As long as it's consistent, that's all that matters. So I could change something and I could be like, all right, is this actually affecting my damage out? And then it'll just tell you, here's how much damage per second you're doing to the dummy right now. You know, maybe it updates once a second or something like that, you know? So I can see like, am I doing a lot? Is it actually way more damage to do it this way to get multiple of these things out? Like you could experiment with your ability. So I think they should really add something. And it doesn't need to be, I did watch an interview where they were saying it's like, yeah, but then you got to have one that like can adjust to every boss on every difficulty. And I don't think you need to do that at all. I think that's way overthinking it. Maybe in 5 years you slowly add functionality to it to make it the greatest dummy of all time. But just having something at a base level, maybe it's as a base level and then it has like an arbiter, like, you know, one of the final bosses on a high difficulty, right? Like it has an extreme high end and an extreme low end. Just something that is like consistent to use would be so nice. I think I would love that a lot. All right. So finally, the one that I think is the biggest that they need to do a better job articulating are just the terminology and helping people understand the difference between something like increased spell damage, or you come over here and you get more damage. Increased versus more, things like this. There are multiple things that do have terminologies that are similar to this, and once you realize it, it becomes much simpler and things start clicking. But I'm telling you, for 150 hours, increased damage, more damage, I just read over them like it's the same thing. Damage up, right? But these are so different. Increased damage, in case you don't know, I guess, increased damage is basically all your increased damage is going into the same pool, right? So you have your damage plus whatever, like if you have increased, you know, plus 100%, plus 200% damage, increased damage. So you're going to get 200%. And then if you get another, you know, 10% increased damage, it's going to go from 200% to 210% increased damage. But more damage is something, is basically an additional multiplicative thing. Instead of additive, it's multiplicative. it basically goes into its own bucket in the formula, right? So you get significantly more damage, especially as your damage gets higher, from more damage abilities than increased damage abilities. But I swear to God, there's nothing anywhere that even, like, why can't increased and then like more have like little tags around them? Like, I feel like most new players just don't have any concept of this. I didn't. Increased versus more, that feels so arbitrary to me. I was just like, it's just slightly different words. Now that you, once you know, and you're like, okay, they're very careful with their language. It's like Magic the Gathering cards, right? There's no words that are just put in there. Like, these are very carefully crafted sentences that do exactly what they say. And you know, it's like one, you know, target opponent or an opponent. You know, the word target is very important in a Magic card. But another example is like right here. I think it's shoot, which one is it? It's right here, right? Increased mana regeneration, increased mana regeneration, increased mana recovery rate, regeneration rate, recovery rate. I read these as the exact same thing. And here's the thing, I still don't know what the hell recovery rate does. Is it in the same modifier as a more versus a increased? They both say increased, neither of them says more, but this is regeneration and this is recovery. Are regeneration and recovery different? Is recovery affect only flasks? Is recovery affect, like, this is the kind of thing that I think they really need to tighten up, where I shouldn't have to go to an outside resource or go talk to a professional of this game to figure out if 15% mana recovery rate is better than 15% mana regeneration rate. Like, you could hold shift, and shift, I actually don't have any skills to see which one gives you more. If they give you more, I think they tell you exactly the same, but they're different words. So I'm assuming they have different functionality. Now, maybe this is a typo. Maybe this one actually is a typo, and that recovery and regeneration are interchangeable, but more and increased aren't interchangeable. So I don't know what to believe anymore, right? Like, so this is the kind of thing I just want a little more tutorialization, a little more clarity from in the game, saying if it says increased, you know, and you don't need increased and then a line underneath mana and then a line underneath rate. You don't need to explain every word, but like, if you are going to have different words here that both are like synonyms for each other in like real life, where you could use them interchangeably, but in the game they have different functionality, I really think you should have a blurb here. It's just, even if it just says like additive, and then you go to more damage, like a multiplicative damage increase, because that kind of stuff is just so important for players learning the game and how to be strong in the game. I can't tell you, it's like every time I have to leave the game to go to a different website or go somewhere to learn about the game, I think of that as a failure on the game's end. Now, again, for me, this game is basically it's basically a 10 out of 10, even in its current state. Like, it's one of my most played games. It's my most played game 2025, but we're not that deep into it. But I played this game a lot more than I've played a lot of games that I love. This game has been absolutely fantastic, but there's definitely a little bit of an issue when it comes to just like the fact that I have to go to like a trade site and like log into a trade site and then have it whisper in game and then go to some, instead of there just being an auction house, having to go and learn what increased versus more is, having to figure out what these in-game end game mechanics would actually do, having to figure out like how exalting an item increases the item level and blah blah blah. Like, all these things I talk about, these are things that I kind of feel like the game is lacking on kind of teaching you. They've done a great job in a lot of things, and these are things that I hope are on their radar, but in case they weren't, there's something I wanted to bring up. So these are the things that I think I would like to see Path of Exile improve upon. And yeah, I guess that's all for today from this game tourist. Anyway, much love. Purplatypus is Purplatypus. I'll see you on the flip-flops. Bye!